Heavy price reporting. We're joined now by George Galloway. Welcome back to the programme. Islamic State has used its bases in Iraq, Syria to launch terrorist attacks on Tunisia, Paris, Beirut, Russian passenger jet over the Sinai Desert and others. What should be done to thwart it? If not British bombing, what should be done to hit it in its heartland?
Well, most of these terrorist attacks were actually carried out by people who were living in the countries in which they operated, Tunisia, France, Belgium, and so on. So you're not actually going to physically stop people by bombing Raqqa turning up on the streets of Paris.
But the planning and the logistics and so on involved Islamic State.
I doubt that. You know, there's not many logistics involved in taking weapons into a nightclub and massacring unarmed, defenseless people. You just need a psychopathic mindset and the access to the weapons. And there are many weapons in Europe. Nobody's suggesting these weapons came, for example, from Syria. But I don't want to dodge your question. I'm as strongly in favor of destroying ISIS and Al-Qaeda as anybody else, more than the Cameron government, or they wouldn't be tolerating a situation where our friends, Turkey and Saudi Arabia, have been supporting these people for years and until now are supporting them. I just think, I mean, we are steeped in blood so far, but it is bloodier to go on, I promise you.
So what would you do?
I would support the people who are fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda and these other groups on the ground. That is the governments of Iraq, the government of Syria, the YPG militia in the Kurdish area of Syria that your package referred to. Give them weapons, give them every kind of support that we can, interdict the support that's going to them from Turkey and Saudi Arabia. That's a far better way than us joining in.
Do you support Russian attacks on the anti-Assad forces in Syria?
I do, if as they are, coordinated with the Syrian government's army, because then the territory is taken by the Syrian Arab army, which has been fighting these people for 5 years.
British attacks on IS forces in Iraq at the request of the Iraq government?
I do, and if they were, as they are in Iraq, coordinated with the government, that makes sense militarily. And if we coordinated our involvement in Syria with Russia and the Syrian government, I'd support that too. But it's because I'm pretty sure that the British government's real game is regime change, and because we've seen regime change before in Iraq and Libya, and it all ended so disastrously, that I'm against it. It's not because I'm a pacifist. I'm not a pacifist.
I've seen you say this, and there is undoubtedly, there was a time when Mr. Cameron's first priority was to get rid of the Assad regime and of President Assad. But isn't it clear to you now that Mr. Cameron's realised that defeating Islamic State is more important to Britain's national interest than getting rid of Mr. Assad?
If it were, you probably wouldn't have me on because I'd be supporting it. But I don't believe that. And I pray in aid his utterly farcical claim in the House this week or last week that there were 70,000 moderate rebels armed and ready to take over the land liberated by our bombardment.
You thought that was fantasy?
There's not 7,000. If there's 700, I'd be surprised. Therefore, what's going to happen? We'll bomb territory, which will then be taken by other so-called moderate fanatics, the ones, as I said to you before, that only eat half your heart, only cut half your head off.
Should we now regard the Russians and the Assad regime as our allies in the fight against Islamic State?
Definitely, and we had the chance after the Security Council decided unanimously a couple of Fridays ago. We had that chance, but that was incinerated by our ally Erdogan in his attack on the Russian Air Force, bombing these people, shot out of the sky, provoking a crisis between East and West, between NATO and Russia, which was completely unnecessary and completely contrary to any legitimate war aims.
Could it not still be put together despite that?
Well, I wish that it could. I suspect that it won't. Russia is now taking countermeasures against Turkey. If we had time to discuss it, I'd elaborate this point. Turkey is the source of this problem. The Turkish border has been open to these people. They are selling their stolen oil, billions of dollars worth.
The Islamic State selling its oil to Turkey.
Yes, Iraq and Syrian oil is being stolen by ISIL and Al-Qaeda and sold in Turkey, I believe, to relatives of Erdogan which is then sold onwards to neighbouring countries. You can't be serious about fighting ISIL while your NATO ally is openly collaborating with them. That's why I suspect Cameron.
You follow very closely what is going on in the Labour Party at the moment. Does Mr Corbyn have an alternative to a free vote when this comes up for vote in the Commons?
If I were him, I'd whip the vote, because his enemies, and they are, as you rightly said, Charlie emolliently denied it, in perpetual rebellion to overthrow Corbyn. If I were Corbyn, this is the terrain on which I would fight, because our record of intervention in the Middle East is so bad, because the likelihood of it not going well is so high. I would dare these rebels to facilitate David Cameron's war.
Wouldn't that rip the Labour Party apart, or would that be the intention?
It kind of looks to me as if it is ripping itself apart. This is 1931 revisited. This is Ramsay MacDonald in reverse. The leader remaining loyal to the party and the MPs joining effectively a national government in terms of war and peace at least. So if I were Jeremy Corbyn, I would whip this vote and let the Labour members pass verdict on those that troop into the lobby with Liam Fox and David Cameron, because I'm pretty sure this is not going to end well.
Even at the expense of ripping apart your shadow cabinet too?
Well,
you'd be whipping a shadow cabinet where there seems to be a majority against Mr Corbyn's position.
Some of them might surprise you with their fidelity to the party in those circumstances, but others might go. But they are supporting the elected leader as the rope supports the hanging man. And a hanging man is asphyxiated in the end.
What are the chances, do you think, of Mr Corbyn following your advice?
Probably not. I would think, listening to John McDonnell and Ken Livingstone, that they're going to go for a free vote. That will merely postpone the putsch.
And give Mr Cameron his big majority.
It'll give him a big majority, and it will postpone only the putsch against Corbyn. Seems to me time to face that up.
George Galloway, thank you for being with us.